Hey guys, how's it going? So UFC Fight Night Hill versus Rountree Jr is happening this weekend. I'm going to run through the card and give you guys all my picks and predictions for all the fights. So let's just get straight into it. And opening up the card, we have Hamdy Abdelwahab versus Mohammed Usman. So Abdelwahab only fought twice in the UFC, with his first fight being on UFC 277, where he took on Don'Tale Mayes. And in this fight, he came out strong in the first round, even managed to knock Mayes down, but then started to get beat up badly in the second before really just getting out-wrestled in the third. But he did win that one by a split decision, but it was very, very close. Following that, he got suspended from the UFC for doping and then came back to fight Jamahal Pogues somewhat recently. And in that fight, I think Pogues was actually robbed. It was a close fight, but I thought Pogues clearly did more damage in rounds 2 and 3. And you could even make an argument that despite Abdelwahab's wrestling, that Pogues won the first as well. But, you know, Hamdy ended up taking that split decision. Very, very close fight. His opponent, Mohammed Usman, started off his career with 3 straight back-to-back wins. With his last being against Jake Collier, where he got outstruck and almost submitted in the first, but managed to come back on the feet in the second, and in the third picked up and slammed Collier, almost got a submission again, but managed to sort of take that one by a decision. Following that, he fought and lost a decision to Myktybek, who is pretty good and trains with Aspinall, who's the best heavyweight in the division. Or in the world, I guess. And to Usman's credit, he looked really, really good in that first round. But later rounds sort of ran away from him. He got outstruck pretty clearly, lost that decision, and he hasn't won since the Collier fight, with his most recent fight also ending in a decision loss where he took on Thomas Peterson. And while he came out somewhat strong in the first round, Peterson used his takedowns and wrestling to take the last 2 rounds very convincingly, with Usman even losing on the feet in those rounds as well. And while I think Usman is on a 2-fight losing streak, I think the Pogues fight has illuminated some real holes in Abdelwahab's game. And I think Usman will be able to sort of outstrike him this fight and defend any takedown attempts or wrestling that will get thrown at him. So for that reason, I'm going to go with Mohammed Usman by a decision win. Up next, we have Tagir Ulanbekov versus Azat Maksum. So Ulanbekov most recently fought at UFC 311 against Clayton Carpenter, where he absolutely dominated him in the wrestling. He won all 3 rounds through the wrestling, with Carpenter putting up a bit of resistance in the second with his own sort of takedowns and wrestling. But he really couldn't beat Ulanbekov at his own game, and Ulanbekov took the unanimous decision for that one. Before that, he got a round 2 submission over Cody Durden, and while the fight was complete domination, with Ulanbekov knocking Durden down in the first, we've seen recently Durden is pretty easy to put away, and if you're going to make the top 15, you're likely going to get past Durden with relative ease. But regardless, this fight was complete domination. His win before that against Nate Maness was a bit better, with Maness being very well-rounded and skilled. But in this fight, he got taken down very early in the first, and Ulanbekov quickly found an opening to catch Maness with a standing guillotine as he was making his way back to the feet, and finished that fight 2 minutes into the first round, so very quick fight there. Azat Maksum, only 2 fights in the UFC, but has been in the promotion for a while now, with his first fight being all the way back in July 2023 against Tyson Nam, where he won the first convincingly by combining his striking and his wrestling, but had a very close second round where he arguably got beat on the feet and lost the first evidently through just getting beat up and only really finding success with a single takedown. He took the split decision though, but it was very, very close. He came back a year later to take on Charles Johnson, where he had a really good first round against a very dangerous striker in Johnson. He was able to knock him down and almost submitted him, but Johnson came back dominant second and third rounds, and he beat Maksum up pretty badly on the feet and almost submitted him multiple times during the second half of the fight. He was showing superior wrestling in the first round, but ultimately couldn't take it, and Johnson took a pretty clear unanimous decision for that. And while I don't think that Maksum is a walkover, in a fight like this, if Johnson can out-grapple him, I don't think it's going to be a question whether Ulanbekov can do the same, and while Maksum can strike, I don't see it really altering the sort of tide of the fight that much. Ultimately, I think it's going to go down to who's the better grappler, and obviously I'm going to have to go with Tagir Ulanbekov for that. So I'm going to pick Tagir Ulanbekov to win this fight by a round 2 submission. Next up, we have Irina Alekseeva versus Klaudia Sygula. So Alekseeva, only 2 fights within the UFC with a 1-for-1 record. Her debut fight was against Stephanie Egger in a fight that Alekseeva beat her up badly on the feet. She knocked her down 2 minutes into the first round. And then finished the fight with a knee bar submission, which is pretty impressive. You don't really see that every day. It's a pretty tricky submission to get off. But it was a very, very dominant first win to sort of introduce her into the UFC. And even though she lost her following fight by a decision to Melissa Mullins, she won the first very convincingly. She knocked Mullins down, which it should be noted, the power in Alekseeva's hands is no joke. She hits very, very hard. But in the second and third round of that fight, Mullins sort of picked it up on the feet. With a takedown in the third from Alekseeva, making it somewhat competitive, but Mullins just really ultimately outvolumed her in the second and third round. And in the end, Mullins took that decision. Alekseeva lost that one. Klaudia Sygula, only fight within the UFC was against Melissa Mullins, sort of a shared opponent there. And this performance was way worse when compared to Alekseeva's. This fight was one-way traffic. Mullins was getting Sygula to the ground with takedowns, holding her there, landing the occasional ground and pound, before in the second, ending the fight via TKO, taking Sygula down and finishing her with ground and pound. And the difference between these two when it comes to that shared opponent just leaves me worried that Sygula can't get this done. I think she'll be outmatched in every area. I think the striking, especially, Sygula will definitely get outstruck. And even if it gets to the ground, if Mullins can sort of do what she couldn't do to Alekseeva to Sygula in finishing her with ground and pound, it makes me very, very worried what Alekseeva's power will do in this fight. So for that reason, I'm going to go with Irina Alekseeva by a decision win. Next up, we have Daria Zelezniakova versus Melissa Mullins. So Zelezniakova started off in the UFC with a matchup against Monstrat Rendon in a fight where in the striking, Zelezniakova was just absolutely dominating the whole fight. But in the first two rounds, it was getting competitive at points. Rendon was taking her down multiple times within those rounds. But ultimately, she took the unanimous decision for that one. Good win for Zelezniakova there. Her only other fight was against Aylin Perez, where she got dominated pretty badly in the grappling and ended up getting submitted with an arm triangle, and also emoted on. For those who know, you know. But Perez is very decent. I think she's actually going to be sort of a top 10 soon. So while it was a bad loss, it wasn't to the worst of opponents. Her opponent, Melissa Mullins, for this fight, as mentioned before, she took on Irina Alekseeva for her debut fight and really struggled with the power of Alekseeva early on in that fight. She got knocked down, but managed to out-grapple her way to a sort of unanimous decision. Following that, she took on Nora Kano in a fight where she got absolutely dominated, with her surviving the first round through scoring a takedown, but did get reversed and put on bottom position, and then knocked out halfway through the second with a nasty head kick that put her down, followed by some ground and pound to end the fight. But despite that loss, I think Mullins is a very competent striker, and most of her her most recent fight against Klaudia Sygula that I mentioned before was proof of that. She beat up Sygula in every round and put her away in the second with some ground and pound after taking her down easily. And while I do think Zelezniakova is a very skilled striker and will sort of be Mullins' toughest challenge yet, we've seen that she has a weakness when it comes to the grappling and takedowns. And outside of that, I think Mullins is very, very good, with only really one slip up in that Cornell fight. But outside of that, it was a very solid record she holds. So for that reason, I'm going to go with Melissa Mullins by a decision win. Next up, we have Ismail Naurdiev versus Jungyong Park. So Naurdiev, before his most recent fight, he fought all the way back in 2020 against really early in his career Sean Brady, and to his credit, he took it to a decision where he won the first in a striking battle, but then lost the second round through getting taken down and held there, and almost got submitted in the third in, Brady fashion. He lost that one by unanimous decision, with Brady just being the better wrestler. Recently came back at UFC 308, where he faced off against Bruno Silva in a fight where he dominated Silva both in the striking in the case of the first round and the second, but also on the takedowns and wrestling, ultimately winning that one by a decision. And while it was a domination, I don't really rate Bruno Silva that much as an opponent, and I think it's a bit concerning if you aren't really able to finish him or put him away. So good win, but not the best of opponents. His opponent, Jungyong Park, recently took on Brad Tavares in a fight that went to a pretty close split decision, with Tavares winning the first very clearly in the striking, and then in the second, Park beat Tavares both in the striking and wrestling, securing that round for him, and ultimately it came down to a third sort of swing round that Park just took through looking a bit busier, winning that split decision. Before that, he went to another split decision against Andre Muniz that was a lot closer in my opinion. Park just edged it out, with 2 being Muniz's round clearly, but 1 and 3 were sort of up in the air, with Park sort of mixing in takedowns and striking, looking a bit busier, winning those 2 rounds, taking that split decision. He did have a pretty dominant win over Albert Duriev when they fought. He won that fight via a second round guillotine submission, as well as knocking him down in the second, showing sort of a level of striking proficiency that we haven't really seen in any of these fights following. But this wasn't the hardest of opponents, and it was all the way back in 2023, so who knows how indicative this is of his current form. And while he is coming off 2 really close split decisions, I think that Park is going to be better in the wrestling and will be able to eat and give back anything that Naurdiev can throw at him on the feet. So for that reason, I'm going to go with Jungyoung Park by a decision win. And closing out the prelims, we have Seokyoung Ko versus Oban Elliott. So Ko was recently supposed to fight on the UFC Fight Night Blanchfield versus Barber. He was supposed to fight Billy Ray Goff. He had visa issues, had to have the fight rescheduled, and I think he's going to have a tough time with his new opponent. I think Goff definitely is a bit easier than Elliott. He's currently debuting in the UFC after a pretty fun scrap on the Contender Series where he was doing good on the feet, winning all rounds in my opinion, but he did have moments where he was getting caught by counters and caught off guard by a shot from his opponent, but ultimately he took a pretty clear decision for that one. Outside of that, not much to go off of. He seems decent. Oban Elliott also meant to be fighting on Blanchfield vs Barber card. He had issues with his visa as well. He was supposed to fight Bahamondes, and I think this one's a little bit easier for him. He's coming off a bonus winning knockout over Basil Hafez, where he absolutely pieced him up on the feet for the first 2 rounds, landed clean on the chin of Hafez early in the 3rd, and put him down, finished the fight with ground and pound. Very brutal domination for that one. Before that, he had a worryingly close fight with Preston Parsons, where Parsons came out looking better on the feet in the 1st round. He arguably won that round, but very quickly Elliott started taking it back, even mixing in takedowns in the 2nd to win the decision in the end. And while that fight was close, Elliott usually walks over his opponents on the feet when he sort of comes to his fights. And we saw that in his UFC debut against Val Woodburn, where he beat him up on the feet the whole fight, spare a moment in the 1st round where he got knocked down, and even implemented some wrestling and takedowns throughout the fight to take a decision win for there. And while I don't think Ko is bad by any means, I really think Elliott is on his way to the top, and I think it will take more than someone coming off a decision win on the Contender Series to stop him. So for that reason, I'm going to go with Oban Elliott by a round 3 KO for this one. And opening up the main card is Muhammad Naimov versus Bogdan Grad. So Muhammad Naimov most recently took on Khan Offley in a fight where he was actually surprisingly beating Offley on the feet in the 1st and 2nd round. Used his grappling and takedowns as well to secure those rounds, and took a pretty clear unanimous decision against sort of a dangerous striker in Offley. Prior to that, he lost to Felipe Lima in a decently competitive fight where Lima looked better on the feet while Naimov was sort of having moments on the ground. But ultimately, Lima managed to take Naimov down and went against the cage, was able to lock in a rear naked choke and submitted Naimov early in the 3rd round. Despite that loss though, I think Naimov is very solid. He holds wins over some really good names in the division like Nathaniel Wood in a decently close fight, but he was ultimately able to outstrike Wood at some points, out-wrestle him at others, and won a pretty big upset decision against an incredibly well-rounded Wood, so this guy's very decent. Bogdan Grad debuted against Lucas Alexander recently, and while he finished the fight with a 2nd round TKO, he was getting out-wrestled in the 1st and was constantly getting put on bottom, and in the 2nd, Grad ended up on top, raining down ground and pound while Alexander shelled up and gave up. The ref jumped in, stopped the fight, and while Grad did look pretty good against this Alexander in this fight, the finish came more due to Alexander quitting than Grad landing anything really of impact, and I think Naimov is a little bit too experienced for Grad, who had a pretty underwhelming debut. I think Naimov's just a bit more well-rounded, has a better resume in my opinion as well, so for that reason I'm going to go with Muhammad Naimov by a decision win. Next up we have Nazim Sadykhov versus Nikolas Motta. So Nazim Sadykhov coming off a win over Ismail Bonfim, who I think is a pretty tricky and tough opponent to beat. And in that fight, he was actually getting beat up pretty badly on the feet in the 1st round, but landed a perfectly placed question mark kick that did some huge damage to the face of Bonfim, and when it went back to the corner, Bonfim said he couldn't see, and the fight had to be stopped due to a round 1 doctor stoppage TKO. But he still looked pretty good prior to the finish, and even though it was a weird finish, it was still a decent win for Sadykhov. Before that, he went to a majority draw against Vishlav Borshev, where he got beat up on the feet and ultimately lost the 1st and 3rd round, but came back and had such a dominant 2nd round. He beat up on Borshev, cut him open, even dropped him badly in that round, and he actually earned a 10-8 on 2 of the judges' scorecards. That was enough to draw the fight out, so that was actually very impressive. And he survived the ever-dangerous Terence McKinney, who is someone who tries to sort of take you out the fight early, comes out hot in the 1st round, and Sadykhov was able to sort of take some serious damage while being taken down, but ultimately weathered the storm. In the 2nd round, he got McKinney on the ground and very quickly submitted him early in that round. Rear naked choke. Very, very impressive comeback. His opponent Nikolas Motta most recently fought at UFC Macau in a fight that was absolute domination in the striking from him. Motta almost doubled his opponent's significant strikes and scored knockdowns in the first and third round, winning a decision victory, granted against a pretty average opponent. Before that, he took on Tom Nolan in a similarly dominant performance where he beat up on Nolan, knocked him out early in the first round, and this was against Tom Nolan, who I think is very good and since then has only won his fights in the UFC and won them quite dominantly, so Tom Nolan's not a sort of slouch. In his fight before that against Trey Ogden, he did lose really badly. He was getting out-volumed on the feet. In the second, he was being taken down and put in an arm triangle submission. Third round he got put in the arm triangle. But ultimately, Motta didn't tap and the refs jumped in and stopped it. Motta wasn't out either. It was a weird stoppage. Ultimately, Ogden had that overturned into a no contest, even though it was really an Ogden win. And if we're being real with ourselves, it was a dominant Ogden win at that. I'd argue he's 30-27 going towards the decision. And if it did go to decision, nothing Motta could have done could have really brought the fight back. And while Motta has picked up some really good wins as of late, I don't think the people he has these wins over come close in terms of the skill of people like Sadykhov. And I think Sadykhov's record speaks for itself. And I just think Sadykhov's is going to be better in every area of the fight, so I'm just going to go with Sadykhov by a decision win. Up next is Tofiq Musayev versus Myktybek Orolbai. So Musayev making his debut on this card. He had a run at smaller promotions. He had a run at Bellator. He had a run at Rizvan, where I think he actually became champion at a point. And he actually picked up some really good performances within these promotions. He actually has quite a few finishes on his record as well. But as of late, I'm really kind of shaky on how well other promotions wins sort of translate to the skill level of the UFC, and it's really only gone worse since that patchy mixed performance from 2 weeks ago. And while he could come out and actually have a really good performance, maybe even find a crazy finish early on, I don't think that's likely to happen, especially against a pretty solid opponent. Speaking of, Myktybek Orolbai debuted against Uros Medic, where in that fight, the first round was very, very close, with Medic looking slightly better on the feet, but Orolbai was dominating on the ground and took Medic down 5 times that round. But it didn't even matter, because in the second, Orolbai dominated, and at the end of the round, caught Medic in a neck crank and submitted him. Following that, he took Elvis Brenner in a fight where all 3 rounds he was beating up on Brenner on the feet badly. Even knocking him down in the third, and for most of that fight he was dominating the grappling as well, and ultimately it would have been a 30-27 had Orolbai not got a point deducted in the third round for grabbing the fence. But either way, a very dominant win against a decent fighter in Brenner. He's coming off a loss in his most recent fight with a decently close split decision to Mateusz Rebecki. Where they both beat the brakes off each other in a complete brawl that one fight of the night. It was incredibly violent, incredibly brutal. They were both putting it all on the table. Rebecki just pulled it through a moment in the third round where he dropped Orolbai and almost had him out. But throughout the rest of the fight, Orolbai was keeping it competitive and doing real damage of his own on the feet, but ultimately just couldn't get it done. And I think this is going to be a one-way performance from Orolbai, with his opponent being fed to the wolves a bit here, debuting against someone who has really, really good performances as of late. And I think this is mainly just because of where the card is. But I think it's sort of the wrong time against the wrong sort of opponent for him. So I'm going to go with Myktybek Orolbai by decision win for this one. Following that, we have Curtis Blaydes versus Rizvan Kuniev. Now, I've already given my prediction on this on the UFC 313 prediction video all the way back then when this fight was originally supposed to happen. And I pretty much stand by everything I said. I don't think much has changed between then and now. And really, I think if anything, I'm more convinced that Curtis Blaydes will take this one, just with Kuniev having to pull out that last fight for sort of, I'm not even sure, I think it was medical reasons. But yeah, it's only solidified my prediction, so I'm going to stick with Curtis Blaydes for this one. I'm going to stick with a round 2 TKO. And now we arrive at the co-main event, Rafael Fiziev versus Ignacio Bahamondes. So Fiziev coming off a loss to Justin Gaethje in a rematch where he stepped up late notice to replace Dan Hooker. And to his credit, he put up a very competitive fight where in the first round he was looking like Fiziev was going to win that fight quite convincingly. He was outlanding Gaethje on the feet and even taking him down, landing some big shots on the ground with ground and pound. But in the second, he got dropped badly with an uppercut from Gaethje, and for the rest of the fight, he was just getting outstruck and caught with heavy shots. Especially when leaving the clinch, Gaethje would hit him with an uppercut or a hook that would really sort of damage him and daze him. And he lost that one by a pretty clear decision. Before that, he fought Mateusz Gamrot in a 5-round fight night main event, where he won the first round quite convincingly, and he showed some really nice takedown defense in that fight, neutralizing Gamrot's biggest weapon. But in the second, he suffered an injury to his knee that caused the fight to stop. He lost via a doctor's stoppage TKO. But prior to the injury, it looked like it was going to sort of be his fight, or at least he looked really good at the start of that fight. And despite his recent 2 losses, he has picked up some really impressive wins in his run in the UFC, with his win over Rafael dos Anjos being one of the first ones to jump to mind. Fiziev was winning the first 3 rounds of that fight comfortably with his striking, and dos Anjos came back in the 4th, got Fiziev to the ground, but ultimately Fiziev took sort of most of those rounds. In the 5th, he landed an overhand that knocks dos Anjos down badly and had him out. He follows up with ground and pound though, finishes the fight. Very, very good win against a kind of tricky opponent at the time in dos Anjos. But yeah, his opponent, Ignacio Bahamondes, coming off 3 back-to-back first-round finishes, with his most recent being against his toughest challenge yet. He took on Jalen Turner at UFC 313, where it was a very competitive fight on the feet, but it ended up on the ground with Turner on top. Bahamondes sneakily lifts up his leg and catches Turner in a head triangle choke while he's trying to kind of get some ground and pound in. Submits him halfway through the first. Very, very good performance. And while he won his most recent fight via submission, his best area in his fights are his striking usually. And he's very, very dangerous if he's left standing. It happened with Manuel Torres. That was a decently surprising performance, as Torres was sort of another up-and-coming dangerous prospect when it came to the striking. And Bahamondes absolutely dominated him on the feet. Knocked down Torres in the first round before later putting him out cold with a brutal overhand in the closing minutes of that first round. And his power in his hands isn't just a one-off with that fight. The fight before that, Christos Gigos, ended midway through the first round when Bahamondes landed a brutal head kick clean on the chin at Gigos, sent him out cold. He's very, very dangerous, and I am a bit worried for Fiziev in this fight. While Fiziev has fought people with power in their hands, mainly Gaethje twice, he hasn't really fought anyone with as much height and reach over him, and someone who is really fast with their hands and kicks and snappy, and while also delivering some devastating power. And ultimately, I just think Fiziev will struggle to close the distance in this fight and won't be able to get off sort of his clinch game or any of his like Muay Thai sort of style. So for that reason, I'm going to have to go with Ignacio Bahamondes, and I'm going to go with a decision win. And now the main event, Jamahal versus Khalil Rountree Jr. So Jamahal coming off a loss to Yuri Prochazka, where it was a very improved and refined version of Yuri, with him keeping his chin relatively low, using his head movement properly this time, not like ducking into body shots. But this time dodging away, countering, keeping his hands up. And to Hill's credit, he came back in the second round. The first round was pretty bad. He got knocked down and beat up pretty badly. In the second, he actually won quite convincingly by just doing better in the striking, mixing in some brutal knees that landed clean on the head of Prochazka. But in the third, he got caught and dropped badly. Did manage to survive that though for a little bit, but then he got sort of hit hard, thrown to the ground, and TKO finished later in the round. And recently it hasn't been looking too good for Hill. His fight before that was against Alex Pereira at UFC 300, where neither were really throwing much to start off the first round, fairly even. But Hill kicks Pereira in the cup, where they reset, sort of the momentum quickly resets, Pereira shakes it off, and Pereira rushes in, catches Hill with this trademark left hook, and drops him before finishing him with some more ground and pound. But I don't think his recent losses are sort of decisive of his whole career. Hill is incredibly skilled, with his second fight to Glover Teixeira being a complete domination, with Hill winning every round clearly in the striking, and even did well in the grappling that fight, an area that Teixeira usually has complete control in. And you could argue that his win was against a washed up version of Teixeira, but I disagree, because he was putting in a good fight himself. One fight of the night, and regardless, Hill won this one 50-45, took the belt off Teixeira in one of the highest strike differentials in UFC history as well, so absolutely dominated him in that fight. His opponent, Khalil Rountree Jr., most notable for his most recent fight against Alex Pereira, where in the start of the fight he was putting up most sort of outstriking Pereira. He looked way better in the first 2 rounds and won them very clearly. But in the third round, Pereira starts turning up the volume, landing clean on the head of Rountree with a bit more power, and moving out of the way of any counters Rountree would throw. And in the fourth, he got Rountree up against the cage, finished him with a bombardment of punches, and then dropped him with a body shot, finished him against the cage. Before that, Rountree took on Anthony Smith in a fight that ended in a third round knockout of Smith, where he sort of knocked Smith down badly. Smith started scrambling away, and the ref stopped it before Rountree could land this like hammer fist from above. That definitely would have had him out. But I'm a little bit concerned, because the finish was a bit premature, not really, but it was also against an Anthony Smith, who I don't think is the hardest of opponents, and the fight was very competitive prior to the finish. And I think if you're going to be in the top 5 of the division, you need to be finishing Anthony Smith, or at least not having it be this competitive. And the concerns don't end there, because throughout his record, he's had some pretty bad performances against not the greatest of opponents. This was definitely the case with his fight against Dustin Jacoby, who once again isn't the toughest opponent on earth, especially for someone ranked currently in the top 10. And in that fight, it went to a stupidly close split decision, which he ended up winning. But Jacoby threw more volume. I thought he was actually landing better, and a lot of people are calling it a robbery, so it's kind of hard to tell who won that one. And while the Pereira performance was really good, he did get dominated in the 3rd and 4th rounds ultimately, and I just can't ignore some of his more average performances against people who are drastically less dangerous than Hill. And while I don't think you should count Rountree out on this one, and he might actually raise to the occasion, sort of like he did with that Pereira fight, I just can't rely on that, and I think Hill is way more experienced and has looked significantly more dominant throughout his career, with a few recent performances masking the fact that he was a champion at one point. He is very dominant, has a lot of knockouts over the best in the division, so I'm gonna have to go with Jamahal by around 5 knockout for this fight. So that's it, guys. That was UFC Fight Night, Hill versus Rountree Jr. Right now on the screen, all of my predictions, all of Cameron's predictions. You already know the drill. Yeah, this card's actually sneakily kind of good. A lot of the prelim fights I'm very, very excited for. A lot of people kind of coming back after long layoffs. The final 3 fights of the main card are amazing. We've got Blaydes versus Kuniev. Don't know how the hell that matchup still happened, but whatever. Hopefully Blaydes puts him away easily. Bahamondes Fiziev, like, that could have headlined a fight night in itself. And then Hill versus Rountree is also pretty crazy. Breakdown video coming soon, and then next week UFC 317, baby. Let's go. Yeah, bye bye.